Welcome to Trends with Benefits, an award-winning podcast by Van Eck with a forward-looking perspective. We explore new ways of thinking about the markets, work, and life. Here's your host, Ed Lopez.
Welcome to another episode of Trends with Benefits. My guest today is Vitaliy Katsenelson. He's CEO of Denver-based value investment firm IMA. He is also a successful author. And in fact, we'll be talking about his latest book, Soul in the Game, The Art of a Meaningful Life. So welcome, Vitaliy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ed.
And thanks for sharing your book with me and coming on the show to talk about it. I love the book because it's one, an easy read and short chapters. Makes me feel like I'm quite successful as I go through. But I think there's a lot of great tidbits in there for people. Some might say common sense, but I think a lot of times we forget a lot of this stuff, and it's helpful to reacquaint ourselves with some of the ideas that you put forth in the book.
Well, thank you. I was writing it to remind myself as well. So
yeah. Well, I mean, maybe you can tell me a little bit about how the book came about. You've written two other books, really more on investing itself, but this is a bit of a departure.
No, this is a significant departure, right? Because I have a master's degree in finance. I am a CFA. I've been investing for the last 25 years. So me writing a book about a topic that's absolutely nothing to do with investing was a huge departure. Freddie Mercury has this song, and I love the title, "There Must Be More to Life Than This." And to me, this was just writing about investing. I wanted to write a book that would help people. Would not just help people who are interested in investing, but it would help anybody. And there are 75 chapters. If one or two of these chapters touched them and made their life a little bit better, then I have succeeded.
Did it start out as separate blogs, or did you write it all the way through? How did it come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so that's a good point. So I write a newsletter. And my newsletter is basically my articles that I've written for Financial Times or Institutional Investor or whatever. And some of those articles were about life. So I was going to take those articles, life articles, and put them into a book. But as I started doing this, I realized I have so many more new ideas. It's basically half of the book, maybe 40% of the book, completely new content.
Tell me a little bit about the structure of the book. I found myself jumping into different chapters, sometimes going through the whole chapter, sometimes jumping to another chapter. How would you approach your book?
This is not a typical book. This book is basically has 5 sections, I think. It's a biographical section. I talk about my travel around the world a little bit. I also talk about Stoic philosophy. I talk about parenting. I talk about creativity. I talk about classical music. So, this is it's a very different structure you would find in other books, but there is an arc that goes through this book, and I think the arc creativity is kind of the arc. That's you can find in many parts. In many that goes through the whole book. The way I would read the book, the way I would want reader to read the book, is just kind of one chapter at a time, 1 or 2 chapters a day. And you read a chapter or two, and you just think about them, and then that's how I would suggest people read the book.
Perhaps we can talk a little bit about Stoicism. I feel like it's a key theme in your book. I haven't really practiced that. I understand some of the basic principles, but what does Stoicism mean to you?
Well, let's go back 2,000 years. Stoicism started in ancient Greece 2,000 years ago, and what it is really. It's an operating system for life that if you practice it, if you embrace it, it would basically help you to minimize pain you have in your life. And by doing it, it's going to enhance your life. It's going to remove a lot of anxiety in your life and make you a happier person and a better person to be around. That's kind of how I look at Stoic philosophy. But there's basically 3 main Stoic philosophers that we know of today. Seneca, he was a playwright. He was a senator. He was an investment banker. He was advisor to an emperor. There was Epictetus, who was a slave. And then there was the most famous of all is Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor of Rome. The most powerful person in the world at the time, basically. Most of Stoic teachings come from these three figures.
And how did you find your way to that? Was it something that happened in your life that you found comfort in some of these lessons, or did you realize later in life, you know what, I just really relate to the way that these lessons speak to people and to me?
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. So I knew of Stoic philosophy for a long time, but it didn't really click with me until I stumbled on a dichotomy of control. And dichotomy of control, I would argue, is probably one of the most important concepts in Stoic philosophy. And if you truly embrace it, it could be a life-changing experience. It could completely change your life. Which is that's a very big promise right there. It could completely change your life, and it sounds extremely simple and primitive, and it's basically comes from Epictetus, who said, "Some things are up to you, some things aren't." Okay, this sounds extremely primitive until we realize what are things that are up to you. What up to you is basically your values, your behavior. Everything else is not up to you. You have a rude coworker, that's not up to you. You're driving to work and encounters a red light, that's not up to you. But what's up to you is how you react to those things. Once you realize this, once you start practicing it, that could be life-changing, because you basically want to control the controllables. And there are very few of those, and everything else is uncontrollable. And therefore, once you start approaching life this way, a lot of things that used to drive you insane, you basically kind of let them go.
Yeah, you talk about the dichotomy of control, and you also talk about reframing. Would you say that reframing and perhaps that practice would be just maybe reminding yourself of what you have as opposed to what you don't, just kind of on a daily basis, and thankful for being?
Yeah. So I would argue that Stoicism works so well if you combine it with some elementary meditation. Let me tell you why. Because there's many benefits to meditation, but one of them, it's basically be able to observe your own thoughts. If you think about meditation, what you're trying to do, you sit there for, I meditate about 5 or 10 minutes a day. Okay, I sit there and I try to focus on my breath. And as I'm focusing on my breath, that's an impossible task to do because thoughts come in. As my thoughts come in, I don't get frustrated by them. What I do, I observe them. I'm observed that at this point in time, even though I'm supposed to be thinking about only breathing, I'm thinking about what time do I have to pick up kids for school, or is there a problem with this company in my portfolio, or what's going on with the housing market? And as these thoughts come in, I observe them and go back to think about meditation again. Okay, that trains my muscle of observing my own thoughts. It becomes important when you try to practice reframing. So there is an event, something like you're driving home and you find yourself you're stuck in 30-minute traffic. At this point, you have an opportunity to reframe. You can either get upset about it, that's your kind of a natural reaction. Or you can say, you know what, that's not a big deal because I need to call my parents, I can call my kids, I can listen to this podcast, so I'll take this time as time for myself. Okay, so what you did, you just took an unpleasant event and reframed it and made it pleasant. And then, therefore, once you reframe it, the reaction is going to be very different. What meditation allows you to do is to notice these negative thoughts that come into you, and then identifying these thoughts, at this point, you can reframe them into something more positive.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, every time I've tried to meditate, and I've not been very good at it, those thoughts come in, and then I just lose it. I lose focus.
No, this is, okay, Ed, I got to stop right there. This is so, so important, okay? Because I know exactly how you feel, and that's exactly what I went through. So meditation has been ruined for all of us by one poster. You can all visualize this poster. Imagine the sunset or sunshine, this skinny, beautiful girl with a ponytail sitting in the yoga position and staring at the sunset or whatever that is, and on the cliff of the mountain usually. And you're thinking, okay, so every time I meditate, this is where I have, first of all, this is where I have to be. This is how I have to look. This is how I have to sit. And the only thing I'll be thinking about this sunset. Well, that's not how our brain works. In fact, when you meditate and these thoughts come to you and you feel like you're failing, like you are not You're not just thinking about your breath. You think you're failing. That's not failing. When you take stairs to the 10th floor and you run out of breath, you don't feel like you're failing, right? Because you running out of breath is a feature. It's not a bug, right? So thoughts constantly coming and attacking you. That's a feature of meditation. And you observing that thoughts, that's what you're trying to do. And you don't judge them, you just observe them, note them. And once you do that, they actually go away.
That's great. Yeah. That's a great way of thinking about it. And thanks for dispelling that image of meditation, because those yoga pants are just a little too tight on me these days.
I can relate to it too.
Let's talk a little bit about creativity. You mentioned it earlier as a major arc in the book. Something stood out to me. Pain, for instance, was one aspect that was in your creativity chapter. Can you tell me a little bit about how pain plays into creativity?
All right. Let me contrast two different tasks. You're working on an assembly line of Fiat. Okay. You come to work, and the only thing you do, I don't know, you take a break from this line, you put it on this line. That's all you do. We can agree there's very little creativity in this, right? Because there is very little uncertainty. Because you know exactly what you're going to do, you know exactly how you're going to do it, right? Okay, so now when you do something creative, you have two conflicting emotions. You have this curiosity of creating something. You want to see how it's going to look like. There is a lot of uncertainty and curiosity at the same time. That's a positive side. The negative side is that there is fear. What if you don't get it done? What if you ruin it? So you have a tug of war of these conflicting emotions. Here's the thing: when you create something, you always going to fail it. Many tries will end up being a failure, and that's a feature, not a bug. Because what failure does, it teaches you how to improve. Failure teaches you what not to do. Okay, so as long as you have a good problems, and I would when you do something creative, something you really want to do, that is a good problem to have.
One of the other things you talk a lot about or write a lot about, and also came out in the creativity chapter, but you have a separate section dedicated to it, which is music and classical music in particular. What does classical music mean to you?
Well, I absolutely love classical music. When I write in the morning, I put my headphones on and I hit my Spotify playlist and just listen to classical music and write. I find this is like one of my biggest loves. Like I'm not sure I would have a very happy life if I couldn't listen to classical music. The reason I wrote about this in the book, because I feel like there is a lot we can learn from classical music composers. Because we look at Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, and we look at them as people, we listen to their music, and it seems so beautiful to us. But what we don't realize, how much pain and agony and frustration went into composing this music. Once you realize that, actually, it's very liberating. Because you realize if they suffered, and they are these geniuses, or we consider them geniuses, then it's okay for us when we do something creative for us to suffer as well. That it's not always easy. Was not easy for them. Also, there's a lot of other lessons you can learn from them. I write about Franz Schubert, who was an Austrian composer who lived in Vienna. At the same time, Beethoven was in Vienna. At the time, he lived, I don't know, the story goes a few blocks away from Beethoven. I'm not sure it's true or not. But he lived in Vienna at the same time Beethoven did. And at the time, Beethoven was the biggest composer of the world. So now, imagine you live in Vienna, a few blocks away from Beethoven, and you are writing classical music. Whatever you compose feels so insignificant because Beethoven just composed 5th Symphony, 7th Symphony. He just did 9th Symphony. In fact, when the 9th Symphony was premiered, people basically said, this is the day the music died because you can't compose anything better than that. I'm so glad Tchaikovsky did not get the message because he was born after that, because he wouldn't have composed, his 6 beautiful symphonies. So what you realize that how does it apply to investing? How does it apply to anything? Well, usually in any domain you are in, being investing, writing, there's always going to be a superstar. Like in value investing, there's Warren Buffett. As Schubert lived in the shadow of Beethoven, every value investor lives in the shadow of Buffett. You can look at Buffett and try to mimic what he thinks, or you can look at Buffett and try to learn how he thinks.
Let's talk a little bit about markets with the time that we have left. Your first two books, one was Active Value Investing, Making Money in a Range-Bound Market, and the little book of Sideways Markets. Those two books, I guess, seem to be focused on sideways markets. And the last time that we spoke, you thought that we might be going into a sideways market. Do you still think that? And what's your take on?
I think we are. I'm more certain that we go into sideways markets even more than when I wrote those books, because today we have one of the highest, if you adjust for corporate profit margins, that have been at insanely high levels. The kind of normalized companies' earnings power for that, you'd find that the valuation of the market overall is very, very high. And more arguably, where in the past, like with the benefit of hindsight, the interest rates were a tailwind, which they basically they're working against sideways market because they forced PEs to go up. Interest rates declined to levels that we never thought we would see in our lifetime. Now, interest rates are going the other direction. I became incredibly bearish on the economy over the next 6 months or next year. I think first of all, we are already in the recession. Everybody knows this because statistically, the first 6 months of the year, we did have a decline in GDP. We kind of put it aside because unemployment is very low, and we basically said, well, GDP declined because of kind of aftershocks of the pandemic, of the supply chain issues. But once that's resolved, the GDP will start growing. What's important to understand that interest rates, when interest rates were so low for so long, that has changed the relationship between the economy and levels of interest rates. So in other words, the way this relationship changes, we accumulate a lot more debt. Asset prices get repriced, where you price to much lower interest rates. In 2019, median house price in the United States was $320,000. Basically, since then, as of today, median house price in the United States is $440,000. That's almost 40% increase in 3 years. Today, the median house price is $440,000, and the mortgage rate is 7.6%. So your median payment for mortgage today is $38,000. That's a $16,000 increase. Now, this is kind of interesting. If this is an if interest rates stay at this level, and for affordability to come back to 2019 level, or even affordability to come back to level of we saw 8 months ago, housing prices have to decline to $260,000. That's a 40% decline. Let me give you the punchline. If that happens, and I'm not saying that's gonna happen in a linear way, like that happened in 2008, but if that were to happen, anybody who bought a house since 2013 wouldn't be underwater.
I'm just thinking about when I bought a house. That's amazing. Yeah,
that is shocking. So so this is only tells you part of the story. Another part of the story is that consumer has been attacked from all different directions. You have higher food prices, picking up garbage costs more, gasoline costs more, but also anything that was financed in the past, where you had almost zero interest rates, from your iPhone or your washer and dryer or your car. Now those things will cost you more, not just because commodity price went up, but because interest rates went up as well. So consumer is getting squeezed from all these different directions, while the real wages are not going up much.
And so I assume you think that's going to have some major knock-on effects on the economy and the markets.
I think at this point, it usually, like usually when these things happen, you don't have they usually delay. It doesn't, it usually delay. And I think it's a matter of time before we go into recession.
How does an investor like yourself navigate this?
We basically today have almost no exposure to anything that's tied to the health of the economy. We have a lot of companies that are basically completely non-cyclical. We own defense companies, we own tobacco stocks, we own companies which are, we can still buy at reasonable valuations, whose health is not tied to the health of the economy.
One of the things I read is about your practice and the way you guys manage money is one of your core values is not chasing fads. What are some fads that you're seeing today?
Well, I think we see a lot fewer fads now than we did 8 months ago. I tell you this, high interest rates, very cleansing to one's imagination. And I think we had 8 months ago, or I guess last November, almost a year ago now, the imagination was running wild and fads were running wild. Now I think a lot of fads have been been deflated already. But I think the valuation of what you would consider to be quality companies, like the likes of, Kimberly-Clark's and Koch's, etc. I think that's the last, the last castle to collapse, And I think the valuation will reset. The new normal valuations will come back to being teens, not 20s.
To more historical relationships.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So is value investing back? Value over growth?
Yeah. No. I think last being a value investor, last 10, 12 years was not a fun place to be. And I think as common sense come back to the markets again, I think it's going to be much easier to be a value investor. Much more rewarding as well. What's
one long-term trend you see playing out over the next several years?
I think the trend, that part of it is already played out in stock appreciation, but it still has some room to go, is the defense spending. If you look what's happening in not just the war in Ukraine, but if you look what's happening in our relationship with China, we are in the foothills of Cold War with China. In fact, every day it gets a little bit colder. I don't know if you saw the news a couple of days ago. We announced that we basically going to ban exports of any microchip technology, of high-end microchip technology to China. If you're a U.S. citizen and you want to work for China in the Chinese semiconductor industry, you should give up your citizenship. Basically, it's that's how it's. So we are going trade war with China, and it's only escalating. I would argue our defense spending will only continue to go up, despite our budget deficits probably going to go up a lot over the next 12 months as we go into recession.
All right, so we have a segment as we finish up here called Trend or Fad. If you're willing to play, I'll ask you 3 to 5 different topics, get your quick take.
I'll play, but though, as you get to know me over the last 40 minutes, you realize there is nothing quick about my answers, but I'll try.
All right. Let's do ESG, Trend or Fad.
Oh my God, this is my favorite topic. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of ESG, kind of on the consumer level. My son, who lives in Boulder, goes to Starbucks, and he brought his plastic cup. He bought at Starbucks, the reusable plastic cup. And he's thinking, I'm gonna be kinder to the environment. I'm gonna bring my own cup. Okay, so he brings this cup, gives this to a clerk. The clerk takes the barista takes a paper cup, brews coffee in it, puts it in his plastic cup, throws his the plastic cup away, the paper cup away, gives the plastic cup to my son back, and says, "Thank you for saving the environment." So what just transpired has absolutely did not help the environment, but there was a lot of virtue signaling in the process. So, and I think that's what's kind of ESG has a good intention. I mean, we all want to have we all want kind of social responsibility. We all want greener environment. We want less CO2. At some point, this gets hijacked. People figure out how to milk money out of this, and basically, at the end of the day, it adds to bureaucracy. That results in a tremendous misallocation of capital. It doesn't accomplish what it's trying to accomplish.
I agree with that. So if I answered trend or fad for you, maybe it's a combination of trend. We all want a better, cleaner society, but fad in the way that the investment industry has implemented it?
Basically, yes.
The metaverse, trend or fad?
I think it's in the long run, it's going to become a trend. In the short term, it's going to be a fad for a while.
Dinks, dual income, no kids.
No, I think we had this trend going on for a while, right? As people moved, like when people lived on farms, kids were kind of free labor. As we moved into urban areas more and more, our dwellings shrunk, and the kids actually and the cost of education went up. All these things, kids became a huge source of large expense. Probably what you see in the developed economies. I think that's probably going to continue. United States our demographics is only going to get worse. United States is in a somewhat unique situation. Our economy is kind of the best house in the kind of not such a good neighborhood. Like when I say the neighborhood, I mean the globe. So we receive net immigration. We still receive immigration from other countries. So we're still going to have a population growth. But like if you look at countries like China or Europe, for that matter, I think the demographic will continue. The population will continue to shrink.
Yeah, that's just an interesting demographic trend that I was watching and wondering about the implications for real estate and investments. But I think you make an excellent point about immigration. That could be one of this nation's most valuable resources if we take advantage of it correctly.
Yeah, and I think suddenly immigration somehow became a political topic, which I don't look at as political. But I'm an immigrant, and I am for legal immigration. And I think this is for thoughtful legal immigration. And I think this would, if you have a country where people want to be, thoughtful immigration could raise living standards for everybody.
And then last one, quiet quitting, trend or fad?
Oh, a fad. Like, what's going to happen, right? When people do quiet quitting, when you go through a recession, it's going to become very loud firing. Like because
yeah.
when you can't hire people, when you can't find people, what you expect from your employees, your expectations from your employees are going to be lower. When your revenues are shrinking and you are trying to figure out how to reduce your expenses, those people who are not mentally there, those are going to be the first ones to lose their job. So I think that's a fad, and that's a fad for sure.
Well said. Well, Vitaliy, this is great. I enjoyed our time, and thank you for being on the podcast. What's the best way for people to learn more about you and follow you?
Since I wrote the book, I couldn't stop writing the book. So I'm already wrote 5 new chapters. If you go to soulinthegame.net, you'll be able to get those 5 new chapters absolutely free. You'll be able to subscribe to receive my articles where I talk about all the topics we discussed, from Stoics to classical music to investing. Soulinthegame.net, probably the best way to get the new chapters for the book and also to subscribe to my articles.
That's awesome. Great. Well, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Trends with Benefits.